Okay, welcome back to the United Pubcast, the podcast of the official Man United Supporters Club here in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. And as you can see, Larry is not with me. You're all very welcome, and you can thank me for that later. We have a night away from Larry. But as you see, it's sort of Champions League themed. Obviously, the Champions League football is back. And with that in mind, we've obviously got Stan Sport presenter and obviously former Matilda, Grace Gill, with us. How are you, Grace?
Good, thanks, Tom. Thanks so much for having me. And sorry to replace Larry and disappointed fans out there, but I'm just stepping in for the night.
No, you're doing everyone a favour. I'm sure everyone is very well pleased. Josh, hope you're well, mate, in the comments already. Evening, mate. And Jamie, one of our listeners over from Northern Ireland, good morning from a wet and windy Belfast. Hope you're all well. It is a bit overcast here in Sydney, but it is getting a little bit warmer. We obviously are getting a little bit closer to summer, but it's an honour to have Grace on the podcast today, get her insight into sort of a lot of the things Champions League football at the moment, because a lot of obviously our Australian listeners know that obviously the Stan Sport have the rights for the Champions League this season, so we'll get into that. Obviously, a good friend of the podcast and Supporters Club, Mark Bosnich, is obviously on Stan Sport as well, so I'd like to pick your brain about Bozza as well and sort of your interactions with him so far. But we'll talk all things Champions League, obviously Ronaldo in terms of that new two-striker system, Solskjaer's position, and obviously another thing, obviously having a former Matilda on the show. I'd love to get your insight, which we'll touch on later, in terms of the Man United women's team. And obviously, so many Australians play on over in England at the moment, but unfortunately, from a Man United point of view, none of them at Man United. They're all at some of the other, I wouldn't say bigger clubs, but maybe the better clubs in regards to the women's game at the moment. So I'll get your insight into that. But make sure if you are in the comments, please leave a like. Make sure you subscribe if you're new. Evening, Rob from It's a Football Thing, and Ellie, good mate of mine. Hope you're doing well, mate, and Flim as well. Good to see everyone here. So we'll get into it, and we'll start. Look, every Man United discussion, Grace, sort of starts with Cristiano Ronaldo. I think he dominates the headlines, and almost rightly so. Just on your sort of insight, just looking for almost from a neutral perspective, what have you made of his return? Coming back, you take away all the hype and the narrative and the story around his return, but also just look at his contribution on the pitch. What have you made of it?
Yeah, look, I think you've mentioned there every story around Manchester United at the moment is going to start with Ronaldo and probably end with Ronaldo too. It's one that, super exciting signing to come back to the club. I think the sort of fanfare around that was always going to be met with, really welcome arms. It's an interesting one because we've seen it play out, well, quite intriguingly over the last few weeks. And I certainly think in some of the results, we've seen what Ronaldo does. He pinches these goals in the last minutes of these games and gets the match winners. So you think for that reason, like, brilliant, perfect, he's doing his job, he's a striker, he's scoring all the goals. But we've also seen the shift in what that's meant for this Manchester United side and the dynamic that's brought into the side, where now Solskjaer has this I guess this problem on his hands of trying to get the most out of Ronaldo and almost building a team around him. I don't know that they've yet got that balance right in building a team around Ronaldo, because he's that kind of player. You need to be built around him. He's not a super pressing player where he's just going to run after absolutely everything. We talk about his defensive work or sometimes lack thereof. So it leaves some vulnerabilities for this Manchester United side. So from a neutral perspective, exciting footballer to watch, but it definitely puts some headaches in Solskjaer's mind for sure.
How have you found that balance? As obviously someone who's played the game professionally, how do you find the balance of, and we almost have to put Ronaldo and Messi in a different category. We kind of, and rightly so, almost do treat them differently. But there's a very strong case, as Man United fans, we're so excited, and rightly so, in regards to his return and what he will bring and what he is bringing. There's no doubt he is contributing. But again, on the flip side, you could very well make a case, well, if Ronaldo is playing in the team, what he does in regards to our build-up, maybe we'll only create 2 or 3 chances a game. Now, very likely he'll score those 2 or 3 chances, but the argument is, well, if we play a Edison Cavani or a Marcus Rashford up front, or maybe we'll play better football and we might be in a position where we'll create 10 chances instead. Now, how many chances those will take, who knows? So how do you find that balance of almost caving to Cristiano Ronaldo in terms of it's almost at a detriment to the team's performance, but then if you do see the evidence, he's scoring so many goals. So how would you, if you're almost in charge, weigh up that balance?
Look, it's a really tricky one. It's a really tough balance to strike in the right way. And I think if you reflect back on some of Ronaldo's early years with the club, he had a team around him that was built in such a way that they could have a Ronaldo there. They had, the likes of people like Wayne Rooney doing all this incredible work off the ball. So to answer your question, I think it's a responsibility of the manager, if you're going to get a player like Ronaldo in, that you then need to build the team around him to support him and to sort of plug those gaps where he doesn't necessarily, perform or doesn't necessarily contribute to that part of the field. So I don't think the balance is right yet. And obviously we saw the slight shift over the weekend with the double striker in Cavani there as well. And I think that worked in the way that Cavani is this really exciting, explosive, slightly unpredictable, absolute workhorse. So maybe to a degree, the pressure was taken off Ronaldo to be that performer, and we saw that worked really well. But the balance itself, it's tricky. And, I think back to the game where Solskjaer pulled Ronaldo off against Young Boys, and he was just fuming. And everyone who watched could see in his face, he was like, what's happening here? So to have that kind of dynamic between your manager and a player, that's also a really tough thing to manage, because then suddenly you wonder, is there sort of a level of pandering to that? And I'm sure to a degree there must be. We even saw it over the weekend against Spurs, where Ronaldo was pulled off and there was a little whisper from Solskjaer in his ear, and you just wonder, what did he say, and what was there a justification there to sort of say, oh, this is why you're coming off? But that doesn't happen with every player. Ronaldo is definitely special. He's in his own category there.
Yeah, well, you sort of alluded to Solskjaer, and I want to bring the sort of point up you made about Solskjaer and also the two strikers. But just a comment here in regards to talking about sort of finding that balance and sort of cave into his strengths, but sort of United at the moment sort of failing to play to Ronaldo's strengths. And Flim just made this comment here saying, anyone else surprised at the lack of service from Ronaldo from wide areas? And I find that, look, watching United every single week, and we get into such dangerous areas in terms of Luke Shaw on the left-hand side and whoever it be on the right-hand side. And you can just see Ronaldo in the box thinking, okay, get this in the box. And whether Luke Shaw, he'll cut the ball back into midfield, or Wan-Bissaka, it's not his sort of strength to be delivering crosses. And I just think it is something that crossing the ball, it seems like a simple skill. Obviously, at the highest level, it's a little bit more advanced than that. But it does get frustrating for so many United fans. You do see Ronaldo, who is so dominant in the air. Like, we think of the world's best footballer, we think of him with the ball at his feet. But he's so dominant in the air. Like, so many of his goals are headers. And I just think United get into so many positions, but just, I don't know, is it a refusal? Is it an instruction from the manager to not cross the ball? Because surely they are, knowing that Ronaldo's so dangerous, they would be instructing to get the ball in there. Or do you think that's down to the players just not having that ability and almost choosing the safer option?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and you're right. He's an absolute weapon in the air. Like, he's incredible. Like, he's a freak of nature in that regard. Like, his timing is just unbelievable. And I think every team knows coming up against Ronaldo that he is such a threat aerially. I think Luke Shaw, one you've just mentioned there, he had a really good Euros, and he's come back into the Premier League, and he had a few solid games there and then a bit of a niggle. And I don't think he's yet kind of found his feet back into his absolute prime form. I think he sort of was there a few months ago, and is maybe working his way back into that. So maybe his sort of execution final pass isn't exactly what it needs to be. And I agree with your point that you see Ronaldo getting frustrated when that delivery doesn't come, or if it's a bit off and he kind of stands there at the back post just looking at him going, what are you doing? I think in a number of occasions they do look for that ball over the top, probably more from a central position. Like, we know that Fernandes is such a poet on the ball as well, and he's often looking for Ronaldo, you can see, with those little dinks over the top. But it's a really great question, and you wonder if there was a bit more in the way of delivery from out wide that would be seeing some more Ronaldo goals on the end of them.
Well, speaking of like crossing, in terms of what Man United fans have been brought up on sort of growing up, it was two wingers, two forwards, get the ball in the box. So it'd be Ryan Giggs, David Beckham cross the ball. And that's always been sort of a real sort of fundamental of Manchester, not having those two strikers. Now, for the first time in a while, not just in Man United, but obviously in modern football, you don't see it quite often. Solskjaer did revert to two strikers against Tottenham. And usually you think, okay, two strikers, you need a bit of pace. And we're playing two, I don't want to say old players, but players towards the end of their career in Cavani and Ronaldo, but they did link up quite well. So just want your thoughts on, is there room for two strikers in the modern game, in your opinion, like to play it on a consistent basis? Or do you think it's sort of, if the situation calls for it, it's fine, but there's no real sort of long-term goals in it?
Yeah, look, I think, I may be entirely wrong in saying this. I think it's got to be a situation that calls for it. And certainly something needed to change in this United side going into the game against Spurs. And I think having the balance of a Cavani and Ronaldo there did work well. You've mentioned the age, their collective age together, 70 years odd. They're not young, but to be fair to someone like Ronaldo, he's never been one of those just constantly pressing players, just going at the ball again and again and again. So it shouldn't be surprising that he's coming to this side and he's playing the kind of football he is, because while he is a bit older and yes, there's some level of load management there and trying not to get as much money in his legs, it hasn't always been his style just to go at him. And they haven't, United haven't always been a pressing team either. So I think the balance worked well against Spurs. I don't know that it'd be something you'd deploy every single week. I think it would have to be a bit on, personnel, who's available. And you often look at the bench in this Manchester United team, and the quality they've got coming on is just unbelievable. So it's not like those people aren't there and the attacking prowess isn't there. It's just about, again, how do you use that in the best way possible to support that team?
Yeah, no, can't disagree there. Remember, anyone in the live chat, please do leave a like on the video if you haven't already. That would be great. But we'll quickly move on to Solskjaer. I mentioned it a few times. I just want your opinion. Obviously, as a player, Solskjaer's position, well, I'm a huge fan of him. However, there's no hiding from the fact that his job is he's almost on a game-by-game basis. Like, if we lose against Atalanta, the knives will be out and there'll be a very strong case of saying he's very close to losing his job. And it's a very weird situation for that manager to be in, to almost be, okay, if you lose this game, you're going to be sacked. If you win, we'll give you another week. And I'm sure it's a little bit more complex than that in the Manchester United boardroom, but it almost does have that feeling that it's on that sort of, he's very on much thin ice. As a player, how would you feel like in terms of seeing your manager in that situation? Do you think it affects the player's performance? They need a little bit more sort of clarity, or as professionals, you should just, okay, that's one situation, I've still got my job to do, or do you think it actually does impact them?
Look, I think it does impact players. I think whenever your manager's job is on the line, you'd be naive to suggest there wasn't some level of disruption in the playing side. But I think what works really well in Solskjaer's favour is that from all accounts and perception, he does still have the support of majority of the players, you'd say, and the board. And I guess the reality of it is that if he didn't, he'd be gone already. Where it's a bit uncertain is around this consistency or lack of consistency in results. So we saw them pinch the win against Atalanta in the last round of Champions League, but it never felt convincing and it never felt like that was the turning point. And then just to turn around and get an absolute walloping against Liverpool kind of threw it back to that space again. And then it's like a roller coaster, and then flip it again against Spurs is, it kind of makes me sit here and go, well, is it just going to be this continued up and down, up and down? Are they going to get a result against Atalanta? And I think it puts a lot of pressure on that game, and not because it's a cup game or not because it's not a Premier League game, but I think they're just looking for consistency. And if he can return a good result against Atalanta in the Champions League, then it speaks to more a turning point, you'd hope, for Manchester United fans and the team.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things in terms of, we just had a discussion in terms of results, and we're talking about what that means for Solskjaer. We often forget that there are players involved. Everything, Solskjaer loses, okay, it's Solskjaer's fault. Okay, it was his tactical change which proved the difference against Tottenham, kind of thing. It always falls back on the manager, and I fully understand and accept in the professional game, it's far easier to sack one manager than change 23 players. So I understand it stops with the manager. But I just want your opinion, as I say, having someone who has played the game at a high level, in terms of what your opinion, I've never come off the pitch playing and gone, that was the manager's fault, we didn't win that game. It's always been, in my opinion, the players. And I just want your opinion on whatever happens, Solskjaer is blamed. He doesn't get much praise, but he always takes the blame for the loss. And I feel some high-profile players get away with a lot in terms of escaping a lot of criticism. Just want your opinion on, look, Solskjaer definitely takes a lot of blame, and rightly so. But I think a lot of the players do get away scot-free, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair call, a fair shout. I think at that level, managers tend to, well, in some cases, not all, but managers tend to, wear the blame or protect their players somewhat. And I think that's something that Solskjaer does really resolutely. I agree with you in that when I've played in a team and you haven't performed and you walk off, and I never look to the coach unless they've made a really, obvious tactical change or error. I never really look to coach or manager and say that's with you, mate. Like you definitely look to yourself as a player and you reflect on what you could have done better and what you did well. And then it's down to, I guess, a bit of the culture and the leadership group in the team, that when things aren't working, that you should be able to pick that up and turn it around. Solskjaer definitely does protect his players in a really strong way. And you compare that to someone like Mourinho, and we see a really stark difference there in their style of management. So, it's an interesting one, but yeah, I do take your point that there are probably some players that perhaps aren't as accountable as what they need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's an interesting point you make in regards to almost that leadership group and the characters they do have, because I think after losses, a lot of Man United fans, we do criticise and we question the mentality of these players. But when you do go through them, if you do look at the names in that dressing room, you've got David De Gea, who's been there around a while. You've got Rafael Varane, Harry Maguire's a big player for England. You've got Cristiano Ronaldo, Marcus Rashford. You've got Juan Mata, who's won a World Cup. There are big personalities in there, and they have the sort of the characteristics and the ability to drag. Look, we are at rock bottom, unfortunately, so it is a big climb to get back up to sort of where we want to be. But if some players can do that, it is the sort of current crop of players. But we'll move on to actually Champions League football, because as Man United fans, we do have to embrace the Champions League, because the last 5 years we've been stuck in the Europa League, so we have to enjoy it while it's here. And just a little bit about Atalanta. You mentioned that first game. While it was fantastic, the comeback and Ronaldo's goal, that's why we sort of love Ronaldo. It could have been 5-0 to Atalanta in the first half. We can't hide from the fact that they were very good. And I'm just thinking, do you think he would stick in terms of how open that game was in the first leg? Could you see a situation where he does stick with this sort of 3-5-2 to try and shore things up?
Yeah, look, I can. I think Varane coming back in was a really important part of the weekend result and going into this game against Atalanta. And I think that spine of the Manchester United team is going to be really important. Even with the result against the Spurs, there was still some defensive frailty. So, as Manchester United fans, I'm sure everyone was super happy with the result, but can't shy away from the fact that Tottenham were pretty poor. So you'd be looking at those things going into Atalanta and going, well, where do we need to shore things up? Where do we need to make sure that we just can't have passes played through our defensive line as they were against Tottenham? They were lucky on a couple of occasions to be granted an offside, so they did come a bit lucky. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he does deploy a similar system, just because it worked. But in that, looking at those defensive frailties that were still exposing them.
Yeah, look, it'll be fascinating to see. Obviously, I think this Atalanta game is so big, it's almost a must-win in terms of our Champions League progression. However, we do have to look, there's a Manchester derby on the weekend, and a big criticism a lot of United fans have had at Solskjaer is sort of the lack of use of the squad. He plays a lot of players into the ground, and you do look at some of our best players, they do need a rescue there, whether it be Ronaldo or Cavani due to their age type thing. So we do need to it'll be very interesting to see how he does it. But just maybe general sort of Champions League thoughts as well, because obviously for those who don't know, which I mentioned at the start, Grace is a presenter on Stan Sport who do have the rights for European football this year in Australia. So just your general thoughts on the Champions League as a whole, because as I said, as Man United fans, we do have to enjoy it, because it's synonymous with European football, but we haven't been to the Champions League for a while, or for a sort of consistent time. So just, it has been an enjoyable one, because you look at results. I remember Sheriff putting it in the top corner against Real Madrid and winning at the Bernabeu. You have Leipzig, who have been very good in the Champions League this season. I don't think they've won a game yet. Obviously, they're in a very tough group, but they could miss out on European football in total. So just your general thoughts of sort of keeping a keen eye this season, just what you made of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before things kicked off, just looking at the groups and the draws, there was sort of the obvious favourites, and it hasn't played out exactly how I think the football community would have thought it would do so. And a couple of games that I'm particularly excited or looking forward to seeing seeing how Dortmund comes back. I know they had a really good result against Ajax last time, but also just had an absolute walloping a few days ago. So that's a really interesting one for such a quality side. And even Bayern, they're such an amazing team, but similarly had a walloping not too long ago, and it just begs the question of how those teams are going to turn around and perform in Champions League matches. But what I love about the Champions League is just the opportunity to see some teams from different continents that you may be less familiar with, and just the quality of players that are coming up through those teams. You mentioned Leipzig; they've been seriously impressive, and even though they're not getting all the results, Club Brugge for me have just played some really good football, and some young players coming through those sides have really caught my attention. So looking forward to this week's match day on Stan Sport.
We mentioned sort of some of the other teams, and I think two of the biggest teams, and they're both, I think, for different reasons, gone sort of slightly under the radar, and I think wrongly so. I think we look at the absolute mess Barcelona have found themselves in. I think they're on the verge of getting knocked out. And I think another team that obviously starting with B, Bayern Munich, they always just trot along. They're almost the favourites every season, and they look always so strong, but we never talk about them. We talk about Real Madrid, Barcelona, maybe not this season. We talk about sort of some of the Italian clubs. If Juventus are good, okay, all the English clubs, obviously, PSG. But Bayern Munich, they're trotting along. They seem to win 5-0 every single week.
Seriously, a good side, a really, really solid footballing side, and they had that great 4-0 win against Benfica in the last match day. So interesting to see, as I said, how they turn around and sort of recover from a fairly hefty loss just a few days ago.
Well, yeah, they did lose, yeah.
They got absolutely creamed, and it was just one of those results that we were left shaking our heads and going, whether or not you're a Bayern fan, that was just a pretty fascinating. And yeah, agree, Flim. Loving Ajax this season. They're quality. They're looking really good. I'm really excited to see that matchup on Wednesday morning too.
Yeah, I was ashamed that Bayern Munich result didn't overshadow the Liverpool 5-0. Everyone was talking about Man United Liverpool 5-0. No one thought that Bayern lost. But Josh saying here, look, and this is a discussion for another day, Josh, but it is interesting. Just you said, Grace, in regards to seeing some other teams in the continent. I have no idea what the potential reformat is. I assume the reformat is just to sort of ease the blow for the Super League clubs. I think they sort of just want a little bit more money and obviously more television rights. But just your thoughts, Grace, on, look, we don't know what the potential reformat will be, but in terms of how do you view the Champions League? Because obviously growing up, it was the champions used to play in it. You had to win your continent, you had to win your domestic league to play in it. And now you're seeing teams, if this potential reformat comes in, teams who finish 6th or 7th in the English Premier League will go into the Champions League. So just your thought, okay, it's great to sort of expand and you do see different teams from different countries. However, do you think it sort of dilutes the competition a little bit?
Yeah, I think we see this conversation come around in football every once in a while, whether it be in a Champions League format, whether it be World Cup format, the expansion to 32 teams. And to a degree, it does dilute that real quality that we talk about, having sort of your top four coming together and playing other world-class sides. I think if I'm trying to find a silver lining or a positive of those things, is that it does expose teams, players, clubs that may not have had that kind of exposure at that sort of level, which can be a fantastic thing too, because you see these players step up in big football in moments, and over years, players particularly have been discovered on that world platform that otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so. But yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have a clear answer on it.
Yeah, well, who knows what it will be, but I'm sure it'll spark a lot of debate over the coming months and coming years, whether it be Champions League or the World Cup, obviously. But obviously, that is on Stan Sport. If you're one of our Australian listeners, I'm sure you are subscribed to Stan Sport for all the Champions League action, unless you're an Arsenal fan. I don't know if any Arsenal fans are watching. No need for that subscription. But obviously, talking to Stan Sport, and obviously good friend of the Man United Supporters Club and of the podcast, Mark Bosnich, just your thoughts on Bozza and interactions and what it's like working with him?
Oh, it's been brilliant. I am under no impression to possess the sort of knowledge and insights that someone like Boz and Craig Foster have as well. But just being around their knowledge and picking up as much from them as possible has been really fascinating. And Boz, as I'm sure you know, is an absolute live wire. Like, I don't know if it's a Boz thing or just a goalkeeper thing. Goalkeepers are a little bit funny like that, in the best way possible. But he's brilliant, and he brings this level of energy to the shows, to the broadcast, that just his laughter is pretty contagious. So he's a pretty special type.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you are in Sydney and obviously not a member of the Man United Supporters Club, please do sign up, because pubs have been closed for months and months. But the Manchester Derby is on this week, and Bozza might be joining us. Obviously, the Supporters Club are returning to the pub this week, so message me if you are in Sydney and keen to go. But Bozza might, he said he might drop down. Look, it's a tough game against Manchester City, so we'll enjoy the night before the kickoff, because after kickoff it might get a little bit messy. But I just seen my mum is here, commented, Grace, and she said, lovely to hear your chat on the podcast tonight, Grace. I think she's glad for some female representation, so she's enjoying that.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
And Flim saying, good team at Stand, to be fair. Yeah, look, I've really enjoyed it at the moment. Some of those, and as you say, when Craig Foster and Bozza sit down and sort of dissect a few things, I think it's fantastic. But just as my mum says there, and I just want to get your last thoughts before we wrap up. The last point we have here is the Man United women's team. I thought perfect opportunity to ask someone who's sort of got such a high standing within the women's game in Australia. I just want your opinion, because, okay, we sit here as Man United fans. Man United are the biggest club in the world. But when we do look at the Women's Super League, Man United is sort of quite newly formed. They've recently been promoted. While we do have that name of the biggest club, okay, you do look at the Arsenal, Cities, Chelseas, they're a lot stronger in the women's game and sort of bigger clubs in that regard. And I just want your thoughts, because I look at someone like Sam Kerr. I think she's the face of Australian football, men and women. I think who's the most well-known Socceroo, maybe Aaron Moy or Matt Ryan, who are big big professionals, highly paid professionals. But I think if you just go someone down the street and point them out, or a photo of Sam Kerr, I think Sam Kerr has that superstar power over some of the Socceroos. And I think rightly so. I think the Australian public has a far better connection with the Matildas than the current men's national team. But that is a debate for another day. But I just want your opinion on, we do look at, say, okay, better teams in the Women's Super League than Man United. But we don't. Sam Kerr plays for Chelsea. That's fantastic, but it's not Man United. Okay, Chelsea are a big club, but it's not Man United. I just want your opinion. What would it mean for a player, a Matilda, to actually play for Man United? Do you think that would sort of skyrocket them to almost, I don't know if superstardom is the right word, but sort of really put sort of women's football sort of further on the map than it already is?
We're talking about how we get Sam Kerr to Manchester United. That's a different conversation too. No, it's a really good point. And I think Manchester United is one of those clubs, whether you're a football fan or not, you know the club. In terms of looking at the Women's Super League and understanding the clubs there and how, you know, your Chelseas, your Man Cities have managed to attract some of those bigger name players and had a lot of success. I think from my perception of it anyway, is that Manchester United women's program are probably in a bit of a rebuild. You know, they had Casey Stoney leave the club at the end of last year in sort of frustrated terms, and she was calling for action around the support in infrastructure and facilities. So completely agree with her on that point, that to get the best players to the best clubs, you've got to have the best support and the best networks around them. So I think Mark Skinner's, you know, come in and started to do a really good job, and the club will continue to build. But I'm sure any of the Matildas, if they were to pull on a Manchester United jersey, it's a special thing. It's iconic, and we saw the fanfare that was around Tobin Heath and Kristen Press playing for Manchester United women's over the last couple of years, and a really similar thing. It just comes with such a special weight to be able to do that. But I do think there's probably some improvements needing to be made around the women's program before you see the likes of, you know, a Sam Kerr or similar kind of world-class player be there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, Flim here saying the Glazers, before we wrap up, in regards to, we had this discussion back in May when obviously the Man United fans got the match postponed against Liverpool, and it was around the time when Casey Stoney left, and we did some of the stories that were coming out in regards to the women's team in terms of they were training, and there was no sort of female change rooms sort of within like a 10 or 20 minute walk of the training ground type thing. And I think COVID played a little bit of a part in that in regards to sort of isolating different teams. But yeah, it was nonsense. And they did have they were so good in that sort of first season where they earned promotion. You think that was something to build on. But then so many players. I remember a player I used to love watching, Lauren James. She went to Chelsea, obviously the brother of Reece James. I thought she was brilliant. You think, okay, if you're losing players like that to go to a team like Chelsea, you think, okay, that's a step backwards. But look, they're the cards they've been dealt with at the moment. But they are improving, so it's good to see them in the Women's Super League at the top table. But I'm just waiting for the day where we get an Australian player over there, because I truly think, and with all due respect to those clubs like Chelsea and Arsenal and City, they're rightly at the top of the tree in the women's game. But I do think if an Australian signed for Man United, I do think they would reach that Sam Kerr level in terms of the Australian public. I think it would be fantastic. But just last comment here, Josiah saying, I get the sense United didn't fully embrace the women's program like you've seen with Chelsea, City and Arsenal. Also allowing players like Tobin to go to Arsenal was terrible. And I think that comes down to what Flim said in regards to the Glazers. I think they've made a lot of promises and they just haven't come through with it, unfortunately, both for the men's team and the women's team. But they have put a new coat of paint on the top of Old Trafford, so apparently it looks like they are doing something. But they're not fooling a lot of fans. Look, Grace, I know everyone in the chat is truly appreciative of your time. It was an honour to have you on. Really enjoyed the chat.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's a real pleasure to be here.
No, definitely. We'll get you on next time when Man United do get their act together and do sign Matilda. It'll be lovely to have you back on. But if you did enjoy the chat, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe. And obviously you will see Grace on Stan Sport. So if you're not subscribed to Stan Sport for the Champions League, hopefully Man United do stay in it. So you'll need it for next season. But please do go get involved with there. And Larry and I will be back on Wednesday morning kickoff for United. So we'll be back on Wednesday night, hopefully discussing 1 foot in the knockout stages of the Champions League. But look, who knows, with Manchester United, we could be discussing or having a quite sort of nasty conversation on Wednesday night. But fingers crossed it's a positive one. Again, a big thank you to everyone in the live chat and a big thank you to Grace. And we'll chat to you Wednesday night. Have a good one, guys. Cheers.